Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Pit Talk, pulling pits and opinions with your host, Gunny G, where service members help service members. Follow, like, subscribe everywhere you get your podcast, and on Twitter, YouTube, and Rumble. We got a special guest by the name of Mike. I'm super excited about this session. I'm going to let him introduce himself. Sir, duty stations, operations, professional bio, so to speak, in terms of military service. The floor is yours.
All right. My name's Mike Zawacki, and I joined the Marine Corps at 17 years old in January of 1980. Yeah, that makes me old and salty for sure. So I was 17, but I left for boot camp, Paris Island, June 17th, 1980, and reported to 1st Battalion, Bravo Company, Platoon 1045. Senior DI was Staff Sergeant Francis, Sergeant Bloomer, and Corporal Kennedy. And after that glorious 13 weeks at Paris Island, I was sent to Camp Lejeune, where I was. I went to comm school, 2512, which was a field wireman. And for those of you young Marines who know of everything in a wireless world, before there was wireless, everything was connected by wire. So basically, it was a telephone guy for the Marine Corps, and then a couple of years later, I went to another school, 2513 school, which was antenna towers, and which today would be cell phone towers. But I got to back up a bit here. If you remember back in the 80s, there was a Marine Corps commercial that played on a regular basis. It showed a civilian going through these, jumping through hoops, but he holds a sword up, and then he gets struck by lightning, and then the tagline is, Marines, the change is forever. Well, that happened to me in real life, not so much with a sword, but with a bolt of lightning at Camp Lejeune. We were setting up comm, which really meant you ran your comm gear, radio, switchboards, telephones, and we had just mounted a whip antenna on top of a comm van. And then we had a steel reel of wire that you had to run across a field or to the other comm van. And as we were doing that, we heard like a loud crack, thunder, and then lightning. And then a bolt of lightning hit the whip antenna on the van, went through the van, through the 26 pair cable, through the aluminum reel of wire, and then through the metal axle that unraveled the wire. I'm on the left, another Marine on the right, and that bolt of lightning went ripping right through us, and we were knocked out. And what that felt like physically, it felt like little shards of glass were being blown through your body. I don't know if you've ever had the pleasure of being struck by lightning, but it hurt pretty bad. It hurt pretty bad. It's funny to say, all these years later, and that was in 1981. That's before I even went to Beirut, Lebanon in 1983. But when we woke up at sick bay, there was a Navy nurse putting a cold washcloth on our face, and then the doc came in and told us that we'd been struck by lightning, and we were lucky to be alive. And all the guys in our platoon, from the our commo, our master gunny, everybody was there and couldn't believe that we were alive. But this young Navy nurse said, if you guys haven't been to church in a while, this Sunday might be a good time to start going again. So we started going to church. Thank God that we were alive. So that was in 1981. And then April of 1983, the American embassy was bombed by Hezbollah in Lebanon. And the next day, April 19th, we had a battalion formation and orders from headquarters Marine Corps looking for a dozen communicators to go to Beirut and rebuild comm. And before we even broke formation, I was already beat feet, locked and cocked in front of the CEO and said, I'm ready to go, sir. And he said, it doesn't surprise me, Zawacki, that you're the first one in here. So a couple weeks later, we landed into Beirut, flew into the Beirut International Airport, and the first glimpse of Beirut was everything was shot up. Everything had mortar holes and rocket holes in it. Buildings were like half up, and it was a horrific thing to witness. And then that was in May 1st, 1983. We were detached TAD temporarily to the 22 Mao, who had already been there 5 months, and they were about to transition out. And then the 24 Mao was coming in at the end of May. So we were the advanced party in comm, and you know, the old salts from 22 Mao were showing us the ropes, so to speak. And it really wasn't a bad gig for that initial month of May. And because I was a comm guy, one of the first duties I had was to ascend this 90-foot, which today would be a cell phone tower, and take down and replace radio and TV antenna components for the Armed Force radio and television service. That's what the MOS 2513 was. And while I was up there, I just happened to have a little disc camera in my pocket, and I bought it at the PX before I went to Lebanon, thinking, you know, I'm going to a foreign country, and, you know, this is why you join the Marine Corps, not to sit on your rear end at Camp Lejeune and just wait for the day you know, looking for your EAS date. So when I climbed to the top of the tower, first thing I did is I took a 360-degree view of all of Lebanon. So I had the Beirut airport, I had the Shuf Mountains, I had downtown Beirut, I had the Mediterranean Sea, and then the Beirut Airport Tower, I also had a full shot of the BLT Battalion Landing Team headquarters building, which we ended up the year before the Marines took over and kind of made it their secondary compound. So I had all these great pictures of 90 feet off the ground and looking at the perimeter, and I'm just an E4 at the time. And after I had the pictures developed, actually, when I was up there, I thought to myself, we're pretty vulnerable where we're at. We're in like the lowest, flattest part of Lebanon, and we're right at the edge of the Beirut airport. So we're along the main road that gets you in and out of the airport. And it just seemed a little sketchy to me. And that was kind of my first glimpse of the overall view of the whole compound and how we were laid out. So I'm going to catch a breath here for a minute and field a question or two. I just dumped a lot of stuff at you, Gunny.
You did. You did. After we're gonna backtrack. After Lebanon, where did you go after that?
That's when I say the change. When they say the change is forever, you know, the Marine Corps changes you all by itself. Just 13 weeks at Paris Island, or even you Hollywood Marines, you know, you guys have it way easier out there than we did. But after Lebanon, the hit that put on your soul and on your spirit. I didn't lose faith in the Marine Corps, but I did lose faith in politics, politicians, and policy and all that, because the most frustrating thing about the catastrophe of Beirut was every Marine and even sailor and soldier that was in that building, just every Marine themselves. I don't care if he was a colonel, a captain, a corporal, or a cook, or even just a boot PFC. Every one of us had the ability to take out any enemy combatant, regardless. And the fact that it's like when you walk up or march up to the rifle range at Paris Island, I can still see the red, there's a red sign with yellow print on it that said 1 shot, 1 kill. Well, in Lebanon, one terrorist took 1 shot and killed 241 of us. You never get over that kind of a defeat. You know, as Marines, sure, I could take a beating from a couple of sailors when you're a boot and you're out and about and you're just being drunk and stupid. But to witness that kind of death and devastation, it took the wind out of your sails beyond what you can even, like imagine. So when I came back from leave after Lebanon, I sat down with the career planner of a battalion, and the gunny says to me, he goes, "All right, Corporal Z, what do you think? Give me 4 more years. Give me 4 more years. I'll make you E5 effective today. You get back pay. I'll make you E5 starting today. Pick any duty station you want, Hawaii, wherever you want to go, and just give me 4 more years." I said, "Gunny, if you could send me back to Lebanon this time with a loaded weapon and no rules of engagement, I'll give you 4 more years. Otherwise, you might as well just call me." So he said, "I can't do that." And I said, "Well, I'm getting out, Gunny." He's like, "Well, what are you going to do?" I said, "I don't know yet. I'll figure that out once I'm out." But that 7 months or 8 months, detached to 2-2 and 2-4 Mao in 83 fundamentally changed everything about the rest of my life. How I looked at people, how I looked at the world, how I looked at everything. Everything changed in Lebanon because you can't be 41 feet away from where that bomb went off. It was a 12,000-pound bomb, and we ourselves, the Mao headquarters, was just 100 miles north of the BLT. And so when the bomb went off on the 23rd, it felt like it did when I got struck by lightning. You got blown out of your rack. You could feel your own body expand and contract. You could feel the heat. It was first the sound, and the sound was if 2 freight trains were on the same track coming from different directions, and then they met up and smashed together. That's what it sounded like. Like I said, that in itself, the simple fact that you felt the heat of the explosion, and then the wave of the heat, and the next sound was everything was muffled. You were kind of deaf, temporarily deaf. And I remember hearing this Marine from Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. It sounded like he said, it was muffled, but he said, Z, we took a direct hit. We got to get in the hole." So we left. He pulled me out of the tent, dragged me out of the tent. We got into our little what was left of our foxhole there, Sandbag City, and then we just immediately started going through the rubble, the sights and sounds of the rubble. But let me back up here. So ultimately, I got out of the Marine Corps after that. But if you don't mind, I'd like to take you to a couple of scenes on October 23rd and what that was like. So when the bomb hit, and you heard that, and because for the last couple of months we had been taking rockets, mortars, artillery. They called it stray rounds, but they weren't stray rounds. They were direct and they were deliberate, and we were consistently going into a condition 1. And a condition 1, as you know, it's like even the war on terror after 9/11, they had the colors on the TV that would show you, okay, red is we're under attack, and orange and yellow and green. Well, that was derived from the Marines in Beirut, condition 1, 2, 3, and 4. So when the bomb went off and we realized we didn't take a direct hit, that was rubble raining down, rubble from the BLT building. And my first sight was just one young Marine, barely alive, just 6-8 feet away from our tent. And I have to paint this picture because this is a part of history you're not going to hear about in a book. You're not going to read about in a book. I'm going to take you right to this scene. So the bomb went off at 6:22, and this is probably 6:26, 6:27, 6:28. I see one badly wounded Marine, but he's alive, and the top of his scalp, was flipped over the front of his head. And I leaned down to see if I could hear him breathe, and I could hear him breathe. And as I looked to my left, because I leaned down to hear him breathe, and I could hear him breathe, just a few short feet away, I saw what looked like a cross, like a telephone pole with a cross beam. And I thought to myself, there's no telephone pole right there. This is all in a matter of seconds. All of this is going through my head. So I see what looks like a cross in the cloud of rubble, and the cloud was like purple, black, and gray, kind of like when you in the footage from 9/11 when you see the cops and firefighters running and people running away from that. It was that color and it was that thick, but you could see a little bit in front of you. So I see this thing that looks like a cross, and then I get back to this one Marine, and I hear him mutter, say, did I make it? So I take the heel of my right hand and I push back the scalp on this young Marine's head. And as I pushed back his scalp, I could feel his high and tight. And I did that so I could see his face. And as I did that, I felt him take his last breath. So I gave him a sign of the cross on the forehead, told him that I loved him, and told him, I'll see you on the other side, brother. And then back to the sign of what I thought was a cross, and now the rubble or the air kind of cleaned up a little bit, but it's strobing in and out because you have lithium batteries that are lithium magnesium batteries that are burning. And I don't know if you've ever seen magnesium burning, but it works almost like a flare. So, and one of those went off. And there's nothing but screaming, yelling, chaos. And again, you're pretty well deaf. You're pretty well deaf because of the sound. And at that moment that I said goodbye to that Marine, I look around and I kept seeing these things that look like little white mushrooms, little glow-in-the-dark mushrooms. And I'm like, I picked one up, and it was human membrane, pieces of human membrane. So how do you go on? How do you move from there? And then I see what I thought this thing was a cross beam. It wasn't a telephone pole. It was one Marine in his sleeping bag, impaled by a cedar tree that had been broken by the blast. And that right there was the epitome of the catastrophe of Beirut, when you saw Marines who were asleep, who you just the night before had a meal with and a little bit of a USO show the night before, and now you're just picking these guys up in pieces and in whole. And I gotta take a break here, Gunny. Like I said, that's a piece of history you're never gonna hear about in books.
For the listeners, are you telling us that you were there when they were bombed?
I was 80 yards away in a GP tent, right behind the Mao headquarters. 80 yards away, and 80 yards is 240 feet, 80 yards away from the crater. And I tell you that not to tell you my story. That's my own account, but at that same time, you have to imagine there was probably 50, 60 other Marines all around that perimeter, in that within 100 yards of that perimeter, who were going through these similar scenes and situations with Marines who were Marines and sailors and a couple of soldiers that were blown out of that building. And like I said, it's something that never goes away. PTSD is rampant, and again, nothing. There's nothing that could have prepared us for that, and this is what I would like to share with all of our Marines. I don't care if you served in Beirut in 82, 83, 84. You were part of that. You were part of that mission, regardless of how catastrophic it was, because there were 273 killed in that whole 18 months that we were in Beirut, 82, 83, 84. And to the rest of the Marines, we're celebrating 250 years coming up. And, we're proud. We're proud as Marines, regardless. I don't care if you peeled potatoes at Camp Pendleton or Camp Lejeune for 4 years, and that's the only thing you did, and you got out as a PFC. Doesn't matter. You're part of that spear. You're part of that sword that changes you forever. And the one of the things the DIs drill into us, right, at boot camp is discipline. And discipline is the ability to follow orders. And discipline, the root word of discipline is disciple. And it comes from being a disciple, and not saying you're one of Jesus's people, but the essence of the Marine Corps, from now my 45 years of being a Marine, because you don't ever stop, you don't ever get out, you don't ever fully transition. There's no such thing. As a Marine, you're always going to feel like you're one up on anybody else around you, unless, of course, they're another jarhead. And even that, I might suspect you too, right? Right. So you don't ever fully get out, but that's the essence of being a Marine, is the discipline, the discipleship of following leaders, fighting for that always fighting for the underdog, fighting for the ones who can't fight for themselves, and it's that spirit of 250 years of Marine Corps. And whether they were the 241 or 273 that were killed in Lebanon, or any battle since then and any battle before then, we all are able to capitalize on the spirit of these sacrifices that our brothers gave, and not just the ones that were killed in combat, the ones that served in Garrison Marine Corps that went above and beyond.
That was quite a detailed story, Mike. One of the new leadership traits is empathy. And I got to ask, how did that, after everything was said and done, how did you feel?
Interesting, because when we finally, I'm going to point, there's something I got to tell you too. The Mao headquarters was just 100 yards north of the BLT, so we were in and out of that building on a daily basis. Our chow hall was in the bottom of it. Our doc's office was on the third floor. Our chapel was on the third floor on the western side of it, and then of course, we had a little club down in the lower level of it. Our shower tents were connected to it. And if you were a Marine in Beirut and you got to stay in the BLT, it was almost like you were able to stay at the hotel. You were able to stay in the hotel, because the rest of us slept in, our bunkers, foxholes, or dilapidated buildings that smelled like death and So if you got to stay in the BLT, it was like, oh, wow, you got to stay in the BLT. It was like staying in a hotel because it was a 4-story building, no windows, no real running water, the electric and all that. We ran all that. But the Mao headquarters was just 100 miles north of that. So the Mao headquarters guys, again, S1, S2, S3, S4, and COM, all of that, we were the first on the scene because we were in that scene. And we were in it and we were on it for the next 28 days and nights. We were in that scene. 28 days and nights before we even got any relief. So you dealt with the immediate aftermath, the wounded, the dead, the personal effects, the parts, and then for 28 days you were in that scene. So you lived it, you smelled it, you didn't get any sleep. The first 3 days and nights of going through that rubble, 3 days and nights, you did not sleep. You just dug and dug and dug, looking for another guy, hoping to find another guy to be alive. And so 3 days, 3 nights, no sleep, caffeine, nicotine, and adrenaline. That's what kept you going. And just the hope that you could find one more guy, who was still alive. And again, to experience that for that whole time, when we got back, when we left, we got relieved that right before Thanksgiving, because we ended up having Thanksgiving on the USS Iwo Jima, and the Navy treated us like kings on ship. They were like, whatever you want, we'll make it for you. You want a lobster and cheese omelet, we'll make you that. We busted Navy shops, but I'll tell you what, man, we love our sailors, and nobody can make fun of our sailors except us, right? But they're still our brothers. But on ship, they had a couple of shrinks come into the berthing area and talk to us for about 10 minutes, not even, and just said, if you got anything going on up here, when you get back, just go to sick bay. They'll know how to deal with you. And it was like that was it. We just picked up dead Marines and sailors, pieces and parts and personal effects for the last 28 days. I don't think you're going to be able to help me with that. So, after I got out, a lot of drinking, a lot of smoking, drinking, just, classic PTSD, totally hypervigilant. I remember the when I did come home, I was visiting my father in downtown Rochester at Xerox Tower. It's a big, tall building, 26 stories, and I'm in the parking garage. I'm in my dress blues. The old man wants to show me off a little bit to his co-workers that had been praying for me and heard about me on the news. Yeah, Mike survived and all this. So I'm in the parking garage, and the smell of the concrete and the visual of the concrete brought me right back to the rubble of Beirut. So I beat feet out of the garage, went over to the bus station. I called my old man from the bus station. I said, Pop, I'm over at the bus station. He goes, why are you over there? I said, I pictured the whole building coming down, Dad. I don't know what happened. Can you just come outside and meet me over here? That's the first time I knew something was wrong and was never going to be right again. So after 16 years of battling all that on my own, I had my great uncle Teddy. He was a Battle of the Bulge survivor. He said, Mick, I see you drinking hard and heavy, kid. You got to go to the VA. You ain't doing all right up here. You got to go to the VA. So I went to the VA in 1999, started talking to the right people. And then a couple years later, 9/11 happened, and that just opened up. Beirut came full circle. Beirut came to my back door. I mean, I'm Rochester. I'm 300 miles away from New York City, but I was born and raised down in Long Island and Brooklyn and all that. So Beirut came full circle. And the odd thing about that, I had wrote a letter to the paper 11 days before that. They were talking about terrorism. And I wrote a letter and I said, it's only a matter of, my final words were, it's only a matter of time before what happened in Beirut happens right here in the United States. And 11 days later, or 9/11 happened. And even that, one of our guys, a radio guy, John Chapura, radio guy, survived the bombing at Beirut. He was 100 yards away in a building, dealt with the aftermath, at first he was a cop in Manhattan, and then he was getting married, so he told his wife, I'm going to take a less threatening job. I'm going to become a fireman. 9/11, second tower, chips on his way up, and then died in the rubble. So it never goes away. But why is it important that I share this story with young Marines today, or anybody for that matter? Because I look at it like this. It's been 42 years. This October, it'll be 42 years since the bombing in Beirut. And back then, terrorism was just one pinhole on a world map. Small country, small city, one incident. That's what it was. And what is terrorism? It's just hate. It's pure evil. That's what it is. And now, as a society, for me, everything is there's life before Beirut and there's that life after Beirut. There's life before 9/11. There's life after 9/11. There's also life before COVID, and then there's life after COVID. So you talk about empathy. So for 42 years, I've observed and absorbed all of this terror and terrorism that's gone on in the world. And I know, and this isn't opinion, it's a fact. The majority of society is walking around with PTSD from so much. They've been rocketed, shelled, shot at. They don't even realize they've been being bombarded. It's more of a post-truth or a post-trust society, because most people in a post COVID-19 global pandemic world, and I say it like that because the media drilled it into us, right? COVID-19 global pandemic, put your mask on, get your shot, or you're going to die, right? They feared humanity into submitting to follow what we're telling you to do. So we did it. And now, 5 years later in a post-COVID world, people are less trusting than ever before in the media, in big pharma. I mean, there's so much truth out there that you can just see. It's like, no wonder why they're agitated, hyper agitated, less patient than ever before, less trusting than ever before. And when you talk about empathy, I see it. I feel it. I can see it in people's eyes. I can see it in their faces, because not only have I dealt with it for 42 years myself, but my small group of brothers, all my Beirut brothers, have dealt with it. So we've got 42 years experience dealing with it.
Yeah, that's good, Mike. That's well said. Obviously, the transition was rough. You talked about alcohol, smoking. You talked about getting help through the VA, and thank God, because you're right in front of me talking about it. So you gotta tell me about what you're doing now for your community and how you're giving back to the Beirut community.
One of the most profound things that my great uncle told me before I even went into the Marines. This is my Uncle Ted, who survived the Battle of the Bulge. And by the way, I had a grandfather that joined the Marines at 26 years old with a wife and two kids. He joined the Marines during World War II. Did his 13 weeks at Parris Island. They said, well, you're married and your two kids. What do you do? He's like, I drive a truck at the Brooklyn Navy Yard in Brooklyn. They said, okay, well, you're now detached to the Brooklyn Navy shipyard in Brooklyn. So he just went back to where he was, but as a Marine, did 2 years, got out as a corporal. I don't even know how he did that in 2 years, but he did his service. I never met him because he died when he was 41. But my uncle said to me before I left for boot camp, he said, you got to remember this. the most powerful weapon that you can have in your arsenal as a warrior is your faith. Faith in God, faith in your brothers around you, your comrades around you. That's who you got to put your faith in. Without that, you might as well be weaponless and have nothing to even use, because with that, you'll be able to survive and thrive no matter what's thrown at you while you're in the Marine Corps. And he said, whether you do 4 years or 40 years, that's going to be your most powerful weapon. So after years of struggle with that in the VA, I finally got into a group of old Vietnam vets, and a couple of Iraq vets were in that group too. Anger management and cognitive processing therapy, and individual sessions, group sessions. And what I found is that if you're able to just be around combat vets, guys who not necessarily shared the same dirt as you, but know what you're dealing with, there's a camaraderie that starts and rolls out there that you can continue to capitalize on and help each other. And now since 1986, when they built a Beirut memorial at Camp Johnson, I can't even count how many times I've gone. Dozens of times. And somewhere in the middle of 2000 and something, I was coming back from Florida in June, and I had to go to the memorial. I'm like, I'm this close, I got to go check in with the boys. So I'm walking up, I stop at the memorial, and I'm walking up to the wall, and I just hear, I kid you not, I hear a voice of one of my dear Marine brothers. He did 25 years in the Marine Corps, retired as a master, and he died in 2008 from cancer. Camp Lejeune, let's just call it, I don't know, some, Camp Lejeune water syndrome, whatever you want to call it. In fact, five of the wiremen that I went to Beirut with, four of them died from various cancers. One died from suicide, and I'm left. I'm the last wireman that was with the Mao headquarters of 24 Mao. And as I'm walking up to the memorial, I could hear my buddy Rob, 25-year Marine, his voice just say, Z, we're okay. We're all okay over here. We're all doing all right, Z. Stop feeling guilty. Stop feeling like you shoulda, coulda, what. Forget that. Live your life while you're still alive. Enjoy every day that you have, and reach out to those brothers that you haven't heard from. And that's anything I'd say to any, current enlisted or officer in the Marine Corps. I don't care if you're the, commandant of the Marine Corps or a boot PFC. You're in combat with your buddies, and you haven't heard from them in a while. You got to check in with them. And if you do go out and deploy together, and you're in something like Beirut together, you can't break that unit up, because they did that to us as soon as we got back to Morehead City, December 7th. We were all just broke up the whole 24 Mile. So we didn't even have 6 months together to try and figure out what we just saw and what we just dealt with, and how do you accept that catastrophic failure as a Marine unit. That would be the biggest thing, is to not just stay in contact, but reach out to those guys you haven't heard from, because it does make a difference. A Skype call every Sunday, or Zoom call every Sunday with just my Beirut brothers. Sometimes there's 4 of us on there, sometimes there's a dozen. And those guys that you used to call colonel or captain or lieutenant or gunny or staff sergeant, they're now Dave, Mike, Bob, on the calls. So these guys and gals you're in the Corps with now, while you're in it, continue to try and build relationships with these folks. So when your time comes and you think, okay, do I want to do a full 25 or a full 30 or whatever, however many years before you make that transition, you'll at least have that Marine Corps family that you can count on and talk to people who know what you've been through.
Mike, you basically hit all my questions. I didn't even have to ask you one. You just hit every single one.
Oh.
Um, where can they reach you at if they want to know more about you, keep in contact with you, or just connect with you?
Beirut Veterans of America .org. There's Beirut Veterans of America.org. We're also on Twitter. The BVA, we're on Facebook, X, all of that. And actually, over the years, I'll share one more story with you. In 2020, and over the years, I've always been willing to talk about the Marines in Beirut. And one lady asked me one time, why would you want to do that? Why would you want to put yourself out like that? I said, because I know 241 guys who put themselves out like that and paid the ultimate price for you. And as for those 241 who can no longer speak, I'm going to speak for them every chance I get. And not just them, but for those guys who endured it and don't want to talk about it because it was as horrific as the one scene I took you through. You don't ever want to talk about it. I talk about it so you don't have to. So you can say, hey, there's a buddy of mine I was in Beirut with. Look at his video. I'll tell you the story. Because not only is there 241 guys that can no longer speak, is people forgot about it. I mean, you have to be at this point almost 60 years old or older to even remember it. I mean, sure, you guys learn about it in boot camp, but the one thing I will tell you that was just amazing and astonishing to see, and this Gunny, I'm telling you, would make you so proud. Every Marine who dealt with the aftermath did it with that invisible Marine spirit, right? And use a tool called Marine Might, MIGHT, Marine Might, where you were moving mountains of rubble with your bare hands, with your brothers, to get at your brothers. You never saw anything like that. But nobody had any fear. And even as we were being shot at and shelled at, as we converged on our wounded, we ran right into it without even hesitating. And without even batting an eyelash. Nobody complained. You just got it done. Nobody was in charge. You just got it done as one unit. And as a society, that's what we're lacking. And over the years, all the different jobs I've had bosses tell me, hey, Mike, you can't expect your people to be like Marines. I said, I don't expect them to be like Marines, but I expect them to at least match my work ethic. At least be better than me, be bigger and better than me. And that's probably one of the biggest things. And, when transitioning from the Marine Corps into the civilian world is to realize no matter how big, powerful, how many years you got in, how many hash marks you got on your sleeve, nobody gives a crap about that in the civilian world. You gotta brace yourself for that, because all of a sudden you're a shower shoe, man. You're not even a recruit. You're a pulley when you hit the civilian world. So you got to be ready for that mentally and mentally and physically. That's for sure. But the biggest thing that I can share is, again, faith is always going to be your most powerful weapon. And as a Marine, you have the spirit of 250 years worth of Marines. You know all about, honesty, integrity, and all the key buzzwords, and the change is forever. And you always have to be willing to reach out of that rubble and help another wounded soul. I'll tell you one more. One of the last guys we pulled out of the rubble, he died. But the skin on his fingertips was worn to the bone. So this Marine was in the rubble for at least 3 days or whatever. But he tried so hard to get out of that rubble that he wore out the skin on the tips of his fingers. So when I have those days where I'm like, there's two ways to face PTSD and all the crap that's going on in the world, and or all the, there's two ways to face it. You can let it control you. You can let it ruin you. You can let it continue to hurt you, or you control it. And you got to recognize the triggers. I can get behind a car, a certain brand of car, and I see a logo that to me means KIA, killed in action, right? Certain kind of car. That's the trigger. I'm behind him, and there it is. There it is. Killed in action. There's a trigger. You got to recognize the trigger. If the clock comes up at 6:22, go right back to Beirut. I get up at 2:20 in the morning. That's the 220 Marines that I think of. If it's 2:41, I'm like, morning, boys. It's become so routine that you recognize and you realize the triggers. And I forgot to tell you this too. So those days when you're struggling, you're thinking, I think of that guy who, even though he was dying, he did whatever he took to try and get out of there. And yet, to me, he's an inspiration. And it's just like I'll share this one last story with you about one of the scenes in Beirut. This is like 24 days after digging through the rubble. I'm walking back from the remnants of this crappy old building that was left that we kind of shacked up in, on my way over to Combat Operations Center. 4:30 in the morning, and I looked down towards the BLT, and I couldn't believe what just happened there in the last 24 days. Everything was all sorted out, cleaned up. Still smells like death and destruction. And I couldn't believe what happened. And I'm laying on the ground like this, pounding the ground like in anger. And as I'm doing that, I feel this tiny little patch of baby green grass. Baby green grass. So I run my hand over it. I'm like, oh man, that feels so good. I can't even believe that. So now, rather than when I look at the heel of my right hand, which can be a trigger for that one Marine's high and tight that I flipped over his head, the flip side of that is I think of that patch of baby green grass and what that felt like. And that's the flip side. I recognize the trigger, but the flip side of it is then I go to that little patch of green grass. There's hope out there. And as a society, the quicker we can all get on the same page and realize that there's a higher power that runs through this the earth. It's the light. It's that light. And I'm not here to preach, but I'm just here to share another thing. It's like when that little patch of grass was proof that even after all that death and destruction, here's this little patch of green grass that just proves that even after all that death and destruction and devastation, the new life continues to grow out of it. And I'll say this, as Marines, we do whatever we got to do to stay in shape. Even now at 63, I'll take on anybody, right? I don't care if it's 10 of them. I'll take y'all on. But that's how we are as Marines. We work our bodies to get that strong. But you got to work your spirit. It's 168 hours in a week. That never changes. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. 168 hours in a week. How many hours a week are you spending to develop that inner spirit, that relationship with that higher power, right? And if a tree in a bush doesn't even have a brain or lungs at all, it has is its roots and its spirit, and it has enough roots and spirit to just reach up towards the light and prosper and grow as a plant, then we should be able to do that too. We should be
That's
able.
good, Mike. Thank you for those kind words, your experience. We're gonna have to do this again because I know there's more. But ladies and gentlemen, this is Pit Talk, pulling pits and opinions with your host Gunny G and Mike. I can't even say your last name, to be honest.
The DIs butchered it. I love the way they butchered it. It was hilarious.
Or service members help service members. Period. Follow, like, subscribe everywhere you get your podcast. Twitter, YouTube, and Rumble. Ladies and gentlemen, me and Mike, we're out.
Semper Fi, Gunny.
I'll talk to you later, okay? Goodbye.
Stand by, contact. Ceasefire. Stand by, contact. Ceasefire.
Pit Talk is a podcast featuring active service members who discuss their thoughts and opinions on various issues surrounding military life, current events, and history. The statements heard here are the opinions of its members and guests. These do not necessarily reflect the views of the Department of Defense and are not endorsed or sponsored in any way. Listener, viewer discretion advised.